guys, welcome back to my channel. So today, for the first time, I'm actually going to be sharing my diabetes journey and how I got my hba1c down from 10-ish, it was somewhere between 10 and 11, I can't exactly remember, to 6.5. So first of all, I just want to say I'm sorry if this video is slightly less structured than my normal videos, because I really wanted this to be kind of like an open and honest chat about my experiences and kind of talk a bit more from the heart and about personal experiences without so much of a structure to it. So yeah, apologies if I jump around a bit and things aren't all in perfect order, but I thought it would just be nicer for me to have kind of more of a personal chat about diabetes. But make sure you stick around to the end of the video, because I will be sharing my kind of concrete tips that actually really helped me improve my hba1c. But for now, let's start right at the beginning of this story, which is actually 15 years ago when I was diagnosed with diabetes at the age of 7. So we've got a lot to cover. So if you haven't already, grab yourself a cup of tea or something, because we might be here for a while with this one. I will try and keep it short and sweet, but I do want to share as much as I can with you about my personal journey with diabetes and how I have become so much more in control of my blood sugar levels, but also become so much more mentally at peace with the condition. So yeah, I was diagnosed when I was 7 years old back in 2004, which, although it doesn't actually seem like very long ago, 15 years makes a huge difference in kind of medicine and research and that kind of thing. So there have been huge advances since I was diagnosed. So when I was told at the age of 7 that I had type 1 diabetes, my control was extremely basic. I had no idea what it was, obviously, at 7 years old. I just remember we were in the hospital for a few days. I was diagnosed actually on bonfire night. So if you're not from England or the UK, that's the 5th of November. And I just remember the doctors came in and they told my parents that I had diabetes, and I just remember my mum started to cry. And as a kid, obviously, when your parents cry, you think something's really serious, and I just thought, oh my god, I'm gonna die, because I had no idea what diabetes was. And then obviously over the next few days I came to realise that it's a lifelong condition, there's no cure, and it's going to affect my day-to-day life in a lot of ways, and I have to start injecting myself and all of this kind of thing. So it was obviously a huge transition for a 7-year-old, but I still believe, even though no one ever wants to be diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, 7 years old is actually quite a good age, because, you know, I wasn't a tiny toddler that was running around everywhere, and my parents weren't kind of constantly having to chase after me to do blood sugars and that kind of thing. I was old enough to know that there was this huge responsibility that I now had to take on, that obviously my parents were going to help me with, but it was my healthcare issue, and I kind of understood that there were going to be changes in my life. And obviously there are tears and there are tantrums, but I think it's maybe a bit easier than having a toddler. But I was also young enough that very quickly I couldn't remember not having diabetes. My long-term memory isn't very good, actually, to be honest. So yeah, I literally don't remember not having it. So it wasn't like I was constantly yearning for a life that I've lost. So yeah, 7 years old, quite a good age, but obviously you never want to be diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. But yeah, my healthcare at the time, or my diabetes management at the time, was really basic. So it was back in the days when it was like you had your vials of insulin and your syringes, and I would just mix the same amount of insulin every single day, twice a day. So I'd have my cloudy and my clear insulin, like my long-acting and my short-acting insulin. I didn't know their names, I just knew I had to have so many units of the cloudy one, mix it with so many units of the clear one, and inject it twice a day. And that was it. No carb counting, no adjusting for different situations. It was just straight up, this is how much insulin you're having every single day. So obviously, because you're not accounting for different situations, there are a lot of potentials for high and low blood sugars, which was obviously quite stressful, I guess, for my parents having to look after a child in that kind of situation. And so I was diagnosed in November, and by December I was doing my own blood tests, and by January I was doing my own injections. But obviously for those first few months, my mum would have to come to my primary school at lunchtime to do my blood tests. So I didn't have an injection at lunchtime, it was just when I wake up and before bed, but obviously I did a blood test just to check at lunch, and then the school would just ring her if they needed, kind of like there was an emergency situation during the day or whatever. But other than that, it was just blood tests before meals and injections twice a day. And I never checked my blood between meals unless I felt like dizzy or something like that. But yeah, that was it for the first few years. I remember I did have a kind of logbook where I would have to put in my blood sugar and my insulin doses, even though my insulin doses never changed. Don't really know whether how that works, and I had a food diary, which kind of helped us to see if there were any foods that seemed to react really badly with my insulin kind of regime. But obviously it's not very accurate at all if you're not carb counting and you're just sticking to the same insulin doses a few times a day. So yeah, at that point I guess it was more of a stress for my parents than for me. I eventually obviously learnt to do my own injections and that kind of thing, but they did all of the calculations for me when calculations eventually started coming into the mix. So there was a point where I moved from just the 2 standard injections a day to I think I would have separate injections of my basal insulin, and then I would have fast acting insulin. And they said kind of, if you're going to be having a big meal, have a bit more fast acting insulin. If you're going to have a small meal, have a bit less, but it wasn't ever anything precise. But my parents were in charge of those decisions for me at that age, because obviously you're still quite young. It was kind of at that point when I also went on my first and only ever diabetes camp, which was great. So I would recommend, if you are kind of a kid with diabetes, definitely go on the diabetes camps if they're available to you, because it's a weekend away with other kids that are experiencing the same thing. And it really helped me, because at school I always felt like the weird one. There was never anyone else with type 1 diabetes at my primary school. And it's also just nice because you have the diabetes care staff that are there for you, so you are so carefree for the whole weekend, and kind of the adults do everything for you for a weekend, which is really nice, and it's a really good break from kind of the pressure of trying to look after yourself the whole time. So eventually my kind of honeymoon period came to an end. So my honeymoon period, even though I was only doing 2 injections a day or 2 or 3 injections a day, and it wasn't a very structured insulin regime, because I was in the honeymoon period at that point, my blood sugars didn't fluctuate too much. But as soon as I started to get a bit more fluctuation in, I was introduced into carb counting. So eventually I reckon I was probably somewhere between 11 and 13 years old. Again, I can't remember exactly, but around then when I started to carb count. And that made a big improvement in my blood sugars, kind of in the short term. But long term it didn't work so well for a bit, because I kind of got into the teenage years, and although I was supposed to be carb counting, I wasn't really doing it properly. At that point I wasn't really thinking about the possible long-term complications, and all I thought was, if I'm not passed out then I'm fine and I can live my life. So yeah, that was when my hba1c did start to creep up from kind of 13 years old, I would say. I got really relaxed with my carb counting. I didn't really care, to be honest, about my diabetes. I just thought, like, it's a problem for future me if things go wrong. As long as I'm not going low and there's no ambulances that need to be involved, then I'm fine, which was obviously a really unhealthy mindset to be having. So yeah, my blood sugars did start to increase, or like my hba1c did start to increase, and I was having a lot more fluctuations, even though I was carb counting, which does really help at that point in my life when I was kind of going through the teenage years. I was also getting really frustrated with my diabetes. I kind of gave up on it. So obviously no system works if you don't use it properly. I also, like I said before, I never tested my blood sugar between meals. I only tested if I thought I was low, or when I was going to eat. I'd never tested kind of to check between meals to see if I was on track, to see if I needed to change any of my insulin ratios or any of that. I just did the absolute bare minimum. So for me at that point, kind of up to the age of maybe 16, 17, I don't really know. No, maybe not that old. From kind of 13 to like 15, 16, I was very relaxed with my diabetes. I kind of considered anything below 16 was fine, and I only considered above 16 as high. So I wouldn't generally do any correction doses for any, if it was like 14, 15, I'd be like, no, that's fine. Which obviously now I am a lot more on top of it, and I will kind of explain how I got to this kind of mental state later. But yeah, my teenage years, my hba1c gradually creeped up. I'm not exactly sure how high it got, because I honestly can't remember, but it was somewhere between 10 and 11, which was like, I think 2 upside down frowny faces on the chart that they had at the hospital. Also at this point in my life, I hadn't really been exercising very much. I didn't really care to exercise. I obviously did PE at school, but this gave me major anxiety and made me not want to do any other form of exercise, because I was so terrified of PE. I've mentioned this in a couple of videos, like I did one recently about how to run 10 kilometers, because obviously now I'm a lot more active and I love exercise to pieces. But back then, because of PE and how it made me so anxious, I didn't exercise at all because I was so terrified, because I was so unfit and kind of embarrassed about the way I looked and how awful I was at exercise. So obviously that really didn't help. I always say exercise is a huge benefit for anyone with any kind of diabetes. It really helps. But at that point in my life, I wasn't doing any. And it was also at this kind of teenage period that I had my worst, kind of most severe hypo experiences, and one of which led to me being hospitalised. Again, I've mentioned this in my 5 diabetes fails video. I'll link any videos that I mention up in the corner. But yeah, basically I gave myself the wrong insulin and ended up going to hospital. I also had one when I was on holiday. I had a really bad hypo, and I was with my cousins and my brother, and the adults had like gone out, and I went really low, and my brother ended up having to give me the glucogel. And yeah, all of my worst diabetes control was basically in this period from kind of 12, 13 to 15, 16, 17 years old. So also towards the end of this period of my life, I developed a diabetes related eating disorder. So I lost a lot of weight before my diagnosis, which is really common because obviously your body is kind of starting to go into shutdown mode and panic mode, and you do tend to lose a lot of weight, which is one of the signs that you might have type 1 diabetes. So I was put on a diet to help me recover back to a healthy weight for that, which worked its wonders. But then I carried on eating in the same way and not doing any exercise, so I put on a bit of weight, a bit of excess weight than I needed to. So I was never kind of like overweight on the BMI scale, but I had like a lot of puppy fat in my teenage years, which made me really self-conscious. And it is really common for people with diabetes, especially type 1 diabetes, to develop eating disorders compared to the average population. I'm not going to go into this now because I think that is a whole nother conversation, and I'm not quite ready to put that part of my story out there online. But for about 2.5 years was the main point where I was really suffering with this diabetes related eating disorder. So that obviously messed up with my sugars even more, because you care less and less about your diabetes and you care more and more about your weight. So you manipulate your food and that kind of thing to lose weight, and you don't compensate with your diabetes management. So that really messed up my sugars even more. So at this period, my sugars were really not in a healthy range, and honestly I didn't really care at that point. I did start doing light exercise with my mum. So we would do, I don't know if you guys have ever done or heard of body balance. It's really fun, but it's quite light exercise. So I started doing that with my mum because I did want to lose weight in a healthy way, but there was this eating disorder also going on in the background. So I came to a point where I was really strongly on the road to recovery with that, and my blood sugars were actually starting to get a bit better. I'd introduced exercise into my routine. I was starting to eat a bit more structured and a bit more healthily, and I was realising that I do really need to manage my diabetes. That was probably when I was about 16 going on 17 years old. Then when I was 17, we lost my mum. She passed away very suddenly, and I had a bit of a relapse. I kind of went into a big hole. I made myself super busy because I didn't want to think about any kind of emotions going on. And so yeah, like I was doing my A-levels, and I had a part-time job which I did kind of one evening and both weekend days, and then I got into other gym classes as well. So this is when I started to really up my exercise, and I would go to the gym most days after school if I wasn't working, and kind of made myself really busy to kind of ignore my emotions. I did have a bit of a relapse in terms of kind of my mental health and food relationship. So yeah, my blood sugars kind of, I don't think they got worse in that period, but they stopped on their journey towards getting better. But yeah, eventually, like I said, because I was getting really into these other gym classes, kind of more intense gym classes, I did eventually come to realise that if I want to be able to go to these classes and stay healthy and perform well in these classes, I'm going to have to manage my blood sugars better. So I really focused in on my carb counting in those years. So I was kind of 17 going on 18, the last 2 years of school, that kind of age. And yeah, I started to focus on my carb counting, and I was exercising, which really helps with insulin sensitivity and all that kind of thing. So I gradually kind of got myself out of this rut that I went in for a few months with my sugars and my exercise and that kind of thing. And then, so by the time I went to uni, it was just after my 19th birthday. And by this point, I would say 80% recovered from my kind of eating disorder behaviour and feeling a lot better. And I would say on the road to much better blood sugar control. So I think it was partly because I could carb count a lot more easily when I was preparing my own food at uni. I also got into such a good routine at uni because I had so much work to do. I had to kind of fit it all in, and so I created a really good routine for myself. I'm a real planner, which kind of contradicts everything I've said in this video about how I manage my blood sugars, but at that point in my life, in my kind of teenage years, it wasn't a priority. But when something's a priority for me, I really plan it into my life quite well. So yeah, at this point diabetes was again a priority for me because I became more and more aware of the possible complications and things that could go wrong in terms of my long-term health, and I decided I really need to kind of give myself a kick up the butt and work on managing my blood sugars a lot better. So first year of uni, my hba1c got down to low 8s, mid 7s. So we'd come down from kind of between 10 and 11, so it was definitely on its way to where it needed to be. I also at uni got more and more into the gym. So I moved away from classes mainly because I didn't have access to classes at my uni for any kind of reasonable price, and my little college had a really tiny but usable gym that I decided I followed a guide for a bit just to get into using the gym and got into a good routine with it. So then by second year I actually moved uni, and there was this much bigger gym available to me, and I was like, right, I want to make the most of this. And I was really into my weight training by then, which was having a massively positive impact on my blood sugars. And yeah, I've spoken about weight training and diabetes in a lot of my videos. I will again link one that I did fairly recently about what I wish I knew when I started weight training with type 1 diabetes, but it made a huge improvement in my blood sugars. And again, second year of uni, I was in such a good routine. My hba1c by this point was down to the low 7s, high 6s. So we were getting on really well by this point. I'd also, like I said, by this point in my life had decided that diabetes needs to be a priority. I wish I'd made this decision before, but kind of going through your teenage years, there's a lot of other things that seem a lot more important even though they really aren't. So yeah, I started doing a lot of online research about blood sugars. I watched a lot of YouTube videos about managing diabetes with weight training because that was what I was really passionate at that point about, and I started kind of going on Instagram and finding some really good diabetes advice and inspiration. You know, I was looking at people who are qualified personal trainers and also type 1 diabetics, who are kind of the goals of what you want when you're looking for information about weight training with type 1 diabetes. So yeah, second year my blood sugar just kept improving, and I was becoming increasingly sensitive to my insulin, which was such a massive help. Then going into my third year, I was well and truly sorted with my weight training. I kind of at that point knew exactly what I was doing in the gym and making real progress in the gym, and everything was kind of coming into place in terms of the physical side of things and the gym side of things. But my third year I actually did a year abroad, which was really incredible, but obviously year abroads, they're quite chaotic, and I did have somewhat of a routine because in the first half I was kind of working a 9 to 5, well, I was working in Paris, so it was like a 10:30 to 6:30, but that kind of like office job. and then in Moscow I was studying, so we kind of had set hours each week, so there was somewhat of a routine, but obviously you're doing a lot of exploring on your year abroad and that kind of thing, and visiting places and people coming to visit you. So there's a lot going on. So my blood sugar management didn't improve. At that point it kind of stayed steady, so my hba1c was still kind of high 6s, maybe 7s. But obviously a lot better and a massive improvement on kind of 2 years before that. Then we get to the summer before my 4th year, so last summer. So the end of August last year I got my freestyle Libra, and I need to say that this is probably the one thing that has helped my blood sugar management the most, by far. I was always scared of technology and Libras and pumps and that kind of thing because I didn't want something attached to me all the time that could, one, go wrong, or two, signals to the whole wide world like, look, there's something wrong with me, I'm diabetic. And obviously a lot of people, well, pretty much if you're not diabetic you don't know what it is, and it just looks weird, and so I was always skeptical, but I would never go back now. It has really like revolutionised my blood sugar management. So from then on I was really on top of everything. I went into my 4th year, and again it was a lot of work in my final year, so I had a really good routine. I kind of, obviously you're a student so you're on a budget, so I kind of ate the same things every week as well, and I had the same gym routine. I was doing the same sessions every week, and so I had such structure to my life. Plus the Libra, I really started to analyse the data on there. There's so much it tells you that finger pricks just can't tell you, and so my control eventually got really, really tight, and that's when I got my hba1c down to 6.5. So I have never been 6.5. Maybe like the first few months after diagnosis I might have been, while you're still in the honeymoon phase and your pancreas is still working a bit and producing a bit of insulin for you, but since then I have never been 6.5 until I got my Libra, because there is just so much information it gives you. But having said this, I then did, a few months ago, have a bit of kind of like a mental health slip in terms of diabetes, because you are bombarded with so much data from the Libra, and because the better I got my control, the better I wanted it, so I became such a perfectionist with my blood sugars, and the tiniest high and the tiniest low became like a huge deal to me in my head, and I just started thinking like I'm a failure. Yeah, I would get so frustrated with myself when my control wasn't perfect by my standards, and that's just not a healthy way to live. And the thing that got me out of that mindset actually was a book that I bought, and it's called Think Like a Pancreas, and it's written by an American doctor, and he obviously specialises in diabetes, but he's also type 1 diabetic himself. I think he's been type 1 since the 80s, so he's really been through a huge journey with his diabetes and had a long time to educate himself about his diabetes. And not only have I learned a lot from this book, that, like, to be honest, I've been diagnosed for 15 years and I didn't think there were too many more things I could learn about diabetes management, but I've already learned so much from his book and I haven't even finished it. But forgetting the practical side, he also talks a lot about the mental health side of diabetes and what you should be striving for, and it made me realise that actually, you know, not being in target all of the time isn't going to mean that I'm going to get loads of complications. Complications come when you are consistently not having good blood sugars for a long period of time, and it allowed me to realise that I don't need to be striving for hugely insane targets with my blood sugars. I just need to be, he has a phrase in there and I can't remember what it is exactly, but it's something like the best diabetes management is the biggest amount of time in target as possible with the smallest impact on your day-to-day life. And so now that is what I live by, and I strive to be in target as much as I can, but when I'm not, I remind myself that it is consistency that matters, and diabetes needs to not be a strain on your day-to-day life more than is necessary. So that's where I'm at today. I am the most in target I have ever been currently. I don't know my current hba1c because I haven't been able to get to an appointment because of isolation. So my last one was at the very beginning of the year and it was 6.5, but to be honest, I've been in target a lot more recently. so I'm thinking it might be lower, but I don't want to jinx myself. But also with my mental health and diabetes, I am so much more at peace with it, and I've definitely been, right now I have the best diabetes management I've ever had and the best mental health I've ever had in relation to diabetes. So I definitely recommend that book for both the practical side and the mental health side. Oh yeah, I have been rambling for quite a while about my personal diabetes journey, but I want to wrap up this video, like I said, with concrete actions you can take to improve your hba1c, and this is how I reduced my hba1c from 10-11 to 6.5. The first thing is, like I said, the Libra is the best thing that's ever happened to my diabetes. So the first thing is, don't be afraid of diabetes technology. Don't worry about what if it fails. Don't worry about, obviously worry about that, but like, don't let it put you off. Don't worry about what other people are going to think. Just, if you think something is going to help you and work with your lifestyle, go for it and put, because in England it can be difficult to get certain things on the NHS, but keep pushing, because if it is going to improve your diabetes management, there is nothing that should stop you from getting that technology. Secondly, the other thing that I say is key for diabetes management is exercise. Please don't let the fear of going low stop you from exercising. Get out and move, walk, go to the gym, start a dance class, start gym classes, start swimming, biking, whatever it is, Pilates, yoga. Get exercising, because it will increase your insulin sensitivity and make it so much easier to manage your blood sugars. Also, when you are either newly diagnosed or you're in a period where you want to focus on your diabetes and make it a priority, focus on the big things first and don't worry about the little things until you've got your foundation sorted. So focus on your carb counting, focus on sorting out your basal insulin doses, and focus on sorting out your bolus insulin ratios. Then worry about hormones and all the little tiny tweaks and things that, the hundreds and millions of things that can affect your blood sugar. Worry about them later, but focus on the big things first, and the little things will come in time. Obviously, again, like I said, reading books or articles, whether you like to read kind of more chatty like blog posts about people's personal experiences, or whether you prefer to read kind of analytical scientific journals, read around diabetes as much as you can without feeling overwhelmed or bored, and read books like the one I recommended. There are lots of books, other books on Amazon as well, that I've seen have really good reviews, but Think Like a Pancreas is the one that I've read and the one that I have seen kind of reviewed and admired most by other people with diabetes. So again, I will link that below, but just educate yourself. And also in terms of education and also mental health kind of support with diabetes, don't forget about the online community. I'm kind of really sad that I only looked into the diabetes online community in the last kind of couple of years, because there are some really inspirational people on there, educational people on there, and just people that understand your actual struggles. I have my own Instagram account for diabetes and fitness and managing the two things together, which of course I'll link below as always. But there are so many good accounts. There are personal trainers who have type 1 diabetes that are sharing all of their tips and tricks, and people that are just sharing their personal struggles that you can relate to. So don't forget about the online community, but most importantly, don't forget to ask for help, whether that's practical help with your diabetes, like an extra appointment with a diabetes clinic, or asking your parents to help you with carb counting, or asking a partner to help you, I don't know, wake you up in the middle of the night for a blood test or something if you're struggling with overnight lows. Anything, ask for help, but also with mental health support. Speak to your nurses and doctors about any mental health support that you need. If you're at school, speak to a school counsellor. If you have family members and friends you can speak to them, but speak to people that you know are going to understand the mental struggle of diabetes, even if they don't have first-hand knowledge of it. People that are going to want to sit down and listen to you and put themselves in your position and help you through whatever mental health kind of struggles you're going through with your diabetes. So those are all of the things that helped me massively improve my hba1c. I hope this video hasn't been too much of a ramble, and I'm really sorry if it has been a bit long, but I just wanted to share kind of my diabetes journey with you in case you can relate to it and find some inspiration or some hope, or just feel a bit of a connection to someone else with type 1 diabetes, because I think it's really important. The mental health aspect of diabetes isn't kind of talked about and looked after enough. As ever, if you have any requests for videos, please comment them down below and I will make those videos as soon as possible. And yeah, I hope you guys all have a really great day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!